Hello, this is Helen Motti, and I want to welcome you to For Eternity.
I put my heart in your hands and you taught me to fly.
Hebrews 13, verses 1 to 3 exhorts us to let brotherly love continue. Do not forget to entertain strangers, for by so doing some have unwittingly entertained angels. Remember the prisoners as if chained with them, those who are mistreated, since you yourselves are in the body also. This week's program will be a very different one from previous episodes of For Eternity. We will have the privilege of meeting and listening to Ray Barnett in an interview I was able to have with him literally in between Ray's regular overseas trips and the many commitments and responsibilities he has both here in Australia and abroad. Although we will not be visiting a specific country or region of the world in this episode, I am sure that as you listen to Ray, you will be inspired and challenged on many levels. Ray, thank you so much for coming in. Can we start by you sharing with us what you have been doing and where in recent months?
Yes, maybe I won't start with recent months, but recent decades. Over the last 20-odd years or more, the focus of my life has been on teaching and training local, national leaders, church leaders, potential church leaders, training them to teach and reach their own people, so teaching the Bible and such things. That's been one aspect of my life. The other aspect, earning a living, has been in marketing and advertising, and particularly as an advertising copywriter. Mm-hmm. So I've tried to divide my life between two different things.
In the work that you do overseas, you have obviously come in contact with the persecuted church in whatever way it looks in whatever region you happen to be in. Can you share your passion for the persecuted church and maybe some of the things that you have been involved in that context?
Yeah, sure. I sort of came to a personal connection with the persecuted church a little differently from some others, in that my if we use the word calling or focus or desire, did not begin aimed at the persecuted church. I was recruited by God, if I can put it that way, into working with local ethnic leaders, maybe village pastors, people who would have no other recourse to formal Bible education, to give them an understanding of Scripture, how to read it, how to interpret it, how to read it and think about it in context, and how to reach their own people. So it was going to where the gospel had already been, and yet the resources were not there. They can't pop down to the bookshop. They couldn't listen to the cassettes and all of that sort of thing. So that was really the focus. But of course, many of the people in that situation are there not just economically. They're there because they have been oppressed, or they are in oppressed or persecuted regions for believers. So it was sort of naturally that. So what I'm saying is it's more of a love and concern for the people I've met and the people I know, rather than a particular group per se.
That is very interesting that you should say that, because only this week I was talking to another friend and colleague who works across Asia with the persecuted church, and his huge desire and focus now is that we in the West, if you want to call it that way, personally connect with the people who are in these circumstances. And, you know, he wants people to go and meet with believers and share a meal with them and talk to them and hear their testimonies, because otherwise it can all just be in our head. And that's what you're saying, you know, it's the people that you have met, that you have come into relationship with, that you have this passion for, which is more specific than just, just a region somewhere in the world.
Yes, that's right. Some people can think and pray a little more globally than I can, like for all the believers in a particular region, or Central Asia or Europe or whatever. I understand that. I have no criticism of that, and I think my brother is somebody who does that. But mine, because of what I've done, has been more focused on particular people. And it's moved and grown as I have worked. I first began in North India, and then some years later was asked if I would go to Siberia just after the fall of communism. In one sense, the oppression had lifted, but there was a vacuum of knowledge, a vacuum of Bibles and so on. Bibles were beginning to come, but there was no understanding of what to do with them or how to read them or how to feed people. So I began there, and of course in some regions in Siberia at that time, the local authorities were just as oppressive and persecuting as they had been centrally under communism. So it began there, and then I moved. While I was there, I was asked if I would go to Central Asia. And I should say these invitations don't come from here in the West. It's the people over there who've said, please come and help me. Central Asia, Central Russia, some of the republics of the North Caucasus, and it just sort of spread from there. Let me give you one example. I was in Siberia and I was teaching. I usually take a group of, not a large group, but one or two people with me to share in the curriculum. I was there in Siberia, and a gentleman came to me from a Central Asian republic. He had heard what we were doing in Siberia. He flew from Central Asia to Moscow, Moscow to Siberia. And I still remember him sitting opposite me in an apartment in the city we were in Siberia. And he said, if there's any such thing as Paul's vision of the man from Macedonia today, think of me as that man. I'm from Central Asia. Please come and help us. Come and help us. And my perspective at that time, and still, is that we're pretty hard pressed out here to say, nah, can't do it. We don't have the resources. We don't have the time. We don't have the money. Pretty hard pressed to give that sort of response. So I have usually reacted and said, sure. And then afterwards had to explain to myself and my wife and other people that, yes, we're going to do this. So that's how it went. But that then developed a love for the people in Central Asia. I had never been there, wouldn't have known how to get there, but it emerged that way.
You have alluded to it in what you have just shared, but I'll ask you the question anyway. What is your perspective at this moment on the post-communist Soviet challenges for Christian believers in that Central Asian Eastern bloc of countries that used to be communist? I've heard and read that in some countries like Uzbekistan, it's actually getting harder for believers to meet and live out their faith corporately and personally. Can you comment on this?
As long as people don't think I'm a geopolitical guru, I guess let me make a comment. In those Central Asian republics, they really just exchanged one form of thuggery for another.
Very well put.
Well, and that's the situation. They went from the hard yoke of communism through a little window of what we might call freedom, and then they went under a new yoke. And the new yoke is often disguised as a political form of Islam. Now, it's probably as Islamic as we are Christian in Australia, if you know what I mean. It's not really Islam. You can't say that it's Islam that is persecuting. It's just thuggery. But in the same way that communism galvanized people politically and tried to give them a focus and was a means of control, now political versions of Islam are similar. But the leaders are often no more Islamic than you or I are Islamic. So the challenges remain similar to what they were under communism, but because these men are localized dictators, they suffer from what all dictators suffer from, and that is an increasing paranoia. If you are mega powerful and you're salting away thousands of millions of dollars, literally billions upon billions of dollars into Swiss bank accounts, you have an increasing paranoia to hang on to your power. So anything that challenges that power or is seen to go against the grain of your regime cannot be tolerated. So therefore, the oppression comes down, and you are quite right, in some of those republics, it is harder or worse, we would say,
right,
than it was under communism.
And just as a slight sidetrack here, your comment about localised dictators and their paranoia, I guess if you exponentiate that 1,000-fold, you end up with someone like Kim Il-jung, or the Kim family in North Korea. That's sort of that is the ultimate extreme of that sort of localised paranoia, except that it's held a whole country in bondage for 60 plus years.
That's quite correct. It's run by, I guess, megalomania and paranoia. I'm now using a couple of big words, but there's almost, do they believe their own publicity? I don't know. I think some of them do. And then there's a paranoia to hang on to that power. And in one of the countries I'm thinking of, one that I lived in for a couple of years, the regime brooks no opposition whatever. One of the opposition leaders had his grandson delivered to his doorstep with bullets through his knees and his elbows, and it was a warning. A warning too late for the grandson, but a warning to the opposition leader. And that's the sort of thing that can happen.
One of the books that I have been quoting from regularly on this program is called The Privilege of Persecution. Now, this is a concept that is generally foreign to us in the West. My question to you, Ray, is do you think that to be persecuted as a Christian believer is a privilege?
As a concept, I find it difficult for us in the West to use those words or those terms. I have a dear friend in one Central Asian republic. He was one of the early believers among his people. He became a leader among them. He was part of our course. We trained him, taught him, became a real man of the gospel and of the scriptures. His 16-year-old daughter, they had been threatened many times, his family threatened. His 16-year-old daughter was beaten to a pulp in front of him and his wife and other children in the driveway of their home. So battered, she suffered massive brain damage. As he stood and watched her lying, twitching and bleeding and groaning on the ground, it would be discourteous for us in the West to talk about the privilege of persecution. I can't imagine siding up and saying, gee, Bill, what a privilege. Now, I understand what the authors are saying, and I have no problem with that brother or people in that land talking about the privilege of persecution. But for us now to use that as a language or a phraseology on our lips, it sounds rather shallow. It sounds with a capital D, discourteous, if you understand what I'm saying.
I totally get what you're saying, Ray, and actually that's just a fantastic perspective and one I totally agree with.
Perhaps I could just step into there, if you don't mind, that persecution is not a good, it's an evil. It is not perpetrated by God. It is perpetrated by evil men and women in a broken world who are waging the devil's war and who passionately hate either the name of Christ or what Christ is doing to their regime. So it's not a good, it's an evil. It is not to be sought. It is to be rejected. It is to be run away from. If you can be let down in a basket from the wall of the city, as was Paul, do it. If, like Jesus, you can walk away from being thrown over the brow of a cliff in Nazareth, do it. Walk away. So it's not a good, it's an evil. So as long as we have that perspective in the West, and then have the conversation about our brothers and sisters, and don't sort of glorify it. I don't mean that we do glorify it. I'm struggling for a word, but I think you know what I'm saying. We're not elevating it as something almost desirable. We will lament with our brothers and sisters what they're suffering. Because if I was standing beside that brother in his driveway, what would I say? Absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing.
I must say I'm very wary of our own proclivity to attach ourselves to, you know, Western cliches and Christianese, and, you know, it's so easy for us, for me here in Australia, to talk about the persecuted church. I've never been persecuted. But I can say the reason I have used this among many resources is it certainly doesn't glorify persecution, just as we continue our conversation. And it actually, a lot of the book is the first-hand testimony of believers from countries. So they are giving their testimony, and in all the pain and the hardship, they are still, whether it's Vietnam, whether it's North Korea, whether it's Nigeria, they are able to say, it's hard, but I count it a joy because, you know, Christ is with me. And it's what you've said. When it comes from their mouth, there's substance to it.
That's right. From them, we must listen.
Yes.
So, again, I'm not criticising the author or anything, and I am right with you. From them, that is a legitimate comment, and we must listen, and we must reflect about our own lives from that. And I'm concerned, as you are, to just bring that corrective, that people latch on to the latest thing, and it's spoken about almost as if it's a soap opera, rather than being real people, real bruises, real pain, real life, death and loss.
And that comes back to what you said at the start of the interview, that it would be of great benefit to us in the West to, in whatever way we can, establish a more personal connection with our brothers and sisters in these countries, because then it isn't just a news story, it isn't just a headline, it isn't just statistics. It's a real person who we know and we love and we pray for, we may have gone and visited. It's not just some nebulous someone out there that we can attach this term persecuted to.
And in our thinking and our praying, there is absolutely nothing wrong now with what you've said in making that person a microcosm of our prayer and saying, for this man, X, and his family, pray for them and those like him in his community, in his church, in his region, in his country. So now I have a focus and I can pray out from that. And that's easier for me than it is to think of all the people in a particular region. I work from the smaller out. Some people don't. Some people are different, I think.
Are you able to share, and we don't know obviously his name or the country, but what was the outcome of this horrific event for your friend after this happened to his daughter? Did his daughter survive? How did the family come through that? What was their attitude in all this?
Yeah, I'm happy to share that. Obviously, I'm not mentioning names or countries or regions, but the first thing that happened was myself and those connected with me who've been part of the work we were doing there thought, not just, isn't this terrible, but what can we do? What can we do? She was not going to get the medical help she needed because it was the militia that had done the beating, and therefore it became political, so she was left lying on the hospital floor for 24 hours and so on and so on. So we ended up having her flown out of the country on medical grounds to Russia. We had her, she went through a process, a long process of learning to be a human again, learning to walk again, getting over the nightmares, just all of the things. Very long story. But what became amazing, and I hope I've got the details of this right, but the mother of the militiaman that beat the girl, that led the beating, came to visit my friend's wife. And she said, "You've got to remove the curse." What curse? The curse on my son. My son is depressed. He wants to commit suicide. You've got to remove the curse on him. She said, "I'd place no curse on him. So bring your son." So her son came. I get choked up with this, but the son was a broken man, absolutely broken man. Despite all the camaraderie of the militia and all of that, he was a broken man. And he
had led the beating, or he had done it himself?
That's right.
Or?
No, he had done the beating and led the assault and been the main hand in the beating. He asked for forgiveness, and she forgave him. And I don't know what's become of him now, but the mother of that young man and that young man expressed that they had never in all of their lives experienced anything like that somebody would forgive in such a way. I don't mean that in a trite way on behalf of my friend and his wife. My friend's wife, the mother of the girl, told this young man exactly what had happened and how she felt.
Yes.
That is legitimate, I think.
Absolutely.
She did that, but she said, I forgive you. And it was just mind-blowing. So you never know what will become of that and how those ripples may spread. So that's the end of the story as far as I know it.
Yes.
Apart from the girl, she's recovering. But who knows what God will do.
Jesus told us that we would be persecuted if we were his disciples. In Australia, in the West generally, we are at this point free from persecution in its most obvious forms. Why do you think this is so? Now, this may sound a really sort of obvious type, but I'm interested in your thoughts on this. Why are we not experiencing these things here?
Well, you're in danger of pushing my grumpy old man button.
That's all right.
Is that all right?
Absolutely.
No, look, let me remind you of what I said before. Persecution is not a virtue. It's not to be sought. I think we all recognise that. Nor do we lament the fact that we're not persecuted, unless, of course, the lack of persecution stems from inadequacies within ourselves and our own perspective, our own lifestyle, our own message. So let me maybe touch on two things in response to that. I think there would be cultural and social reasons, and also, if I can put it this way, theological reasons. Culturally and socially, our society, our country, is a little more disposed towards tolerance of the quaint and the anachronism. And if they think we are quaint and anachronistic, just a group of funny people in the corner, at this point in our country's emergence, our social emergence, they're a little more disposed to tolerate us than they would in some of the regimes we've been talking about. However, if as a result of that we become priests of the status quo, blending in, and if that priesthood of maintaining the society and the culture and being a religious reflection of our secular culture, just a little more honest, a little nicer, a little more happy in our families, if that's all we have become within our culture, then something is wrong. And that then leads us, I think, if I may, to the second branch of the answer, and that would be the theological perspective. And specifically, I mean, our perception of the impact and nature of the gospel. And I want to be careful. In a sense, I'm using this more as illustration than the focus. You'll understand that. Church life, Christian life is very broad. I'm using this as a focus. But I want to say this to people, that we are not saved to sing. It comes as a surprise, I think, to some of the younger generation, but we're not saved to sing. We're not saved to run meetings. We're not saved to be an audience for preachers. We're not saved to go to heaven. Now, I can almost hear the phones being picked up when I say that, but those things may be part of our walk with God, and being with Him at the end of our lives is definitely and unashamedly part of our expectation. I have no qualms with that, and I'm not denying that. But they are not what we were saved for.
Well, the New Testament church wasn't saved for those reasons, were they? And we see that.
That's right. Exactly. And what that does, that perspective projects a terribly one-dimensional perspective on life, even less than one-dimensional. We were not saved to be happy and clappy. I don't mean in a derisive way, but it's just a way of speaking. But we're not saved to be happy and clappy in a broken world. We're saved to be broken in a broken world. And our brokenness, as it did for Jesus, ought to lead us to the broken people. It ought to give us a heart. It ought to stir us within. And particularly for those in our own society or other societies who reap the consequences of an unjust social and political world. And if our lives are focused there, if our brokenness focuses our lives on what is wrong in this world, it's possible that our lives will become a damning critique of the prevailing empire or system. And when that happens, people are not going to be as comfortable having us around. I mean, there are some minority groups at the moment who feel that Christians are dead against them, and this is to do with sexuality and such things. Look at the way they're responding to Christians when they feel their life is challenged.
Yes.
What if we were to be a similar challenge in our own country and other countries on issues of freedom, freedom of speech, poverty, economic deprivation, all of those things that go into oppression and persecution? So what I'm saying is that our theological perspective on the gospel and the fact that we were saved to become people who would enter the world as different people with a new king and as citizens of a new kingdom, and that we will not tolerate injustice and oppression wherever we see it, then if our singing and our meetings are byproducts, that's fine, that's good, but they're not the focus of our lives.
Well, you may have already answered this question, but I'll ask it anyway, and we can move on. What do you think is the major distinctive between the Western quote-unquote free church and the persecuted church?
If I was to bring it down to one word, I would say distraction. I think you already understand what I mean by that. That I think our cultural absorption is a distraction. And we have been... This happens in any society, I think, but we have been distracted into thinking that our lives, our sense of meaning, our well-being, our security, our future, all of those things are most directly affected by what our world system can offer us, what our empire can offer us. We are better off or worse off because of the budget. If house prices go up, we feel better. If they go down, we feel worse, and so on and so on. Now, those things are a part of life. We can't help living where we live. But it is a distraction, massive distraction, to think that that's where our life is focused. And if that distraction has been brought into the life of the church, so that a church meeting is good because it was a really great sing and we felt really pumped up and we all had a happy time, then we are simply a religious version of our secular culture, because you can do that at any concert you wish, be it rock, country, blues or whatever. You can do it at a movie and think, oh, wasn't that lovely? I cried all the way through. There's got to be something different. There's got to be a different focus from what our world offers and the emotions that it taps and titillates. So somehow that distraction has removed us from seeing that we were saved to become part of the kingdom of God. And if I can just, I know I'll go on a bit, but Jesus said to Nicodemus, you must be born again. That was not the goal. You must be born again. Why? To enter the kingdom of God. And we have left that as you must be born again, full stop. The gospel of personal salvation and sin management, rather than the gospel of the kingdom, entering into the kingdom. So we've celebrated the doorway, and we're standing there, and the blood is on the lintel and the blood is on the doorposts, and we're having a wonderful happy time singing about it all. And through the doorway is a world, a broken world that needs to be changed. And we're celebrating what's on the lintel. We need to go through and enter the kingdom of God and become men and women of that kingdom. Now, please don't think I'm saying I've got all this together and that I'm the resident guru and that my life is adequately shaped. I'm not. I'm taking the challenge of the gospel of the kingdom. And I think for us that distraction has robbed us of a focus that the persecuted church has. One friend of mine in a Central Asian country, when she became a believer, her father took a knife to her and tried to kill her instantly. That tends to focus the mind. It tends to focus the mind on who am I really, what is really important. Am I prepared to forsake all and follow him, to leave my family, my friends, my career, my university degree, everything?
Well, it distills the cost here we don't have much of an idea of the cost of our faith because ultimately it doesn't cost us very much usually.
Yes, that's right. Now, again, we can't help living in a country that is relatively free. That is not an issue where we live. We do live here, and we have what we have as a society. The issue for us, the responsibility we have, is what we do with our freedom and how that shapes our life and where our resources go.
And freedom is the broad term for everything that we have at our disposal. As you said, our resources, our time, our abilities, our desire to either step out as ambassadors for the kingdom and in the kingdom, or staying distracted in our culture and having a lovely time on a Sunday or whatever day and then just being absorbed into the secular culture.
It's sobering, isn't it, that the only description of the Last Judgment in the New Testament, the only description of that event, is where Jesus said, "I was hungry and you fed me. I was naked and you clothed me. I was in prison and you visited me." And wouldn't it be terrible to be at that point and have Jesus say, "I was hungry and you built a building. I was thirsty and you bought a new PA equipment. I was in prison and you went on a men's fishing expedition. I'm not saying those things are wrong per se, but they must be in some sort of balance.
Yep, exactly.
Otherwise, we will not stand under the blazing eye of the one who will be before us on that day.
It was actually Matthew 25. It was actually those exact scriptures that I have shared over the years with quite a number of people in different contexts that ripped us out of our Australian lifestyle and culture and comfortableness, if that's a word. It was those scriptures that took us out of Australia. God used those primarily, as well as others, Proverbs 31:8 and others, to adjust and change our perspective on what it is to be a Christian. So those scriptures are very, 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 very close and deep in my heart.
It will be easy to say, by the way, yes, but you see, that's a social gospel. You're denying the reality of the new birth and forgiveness and justification. No. The reason what you have done and what we're talking about has value is because Christ has made us clean. And as clean people now, what will we do? There's your agenda.
Well, again, another scripture that became illuminated to me only in the last couple of years was in Ephesians 2. It says, "You were created for good works." And for me, I am not a great intellectual or theological scholar, but it makes perfect sense to me that those good works we were created to do, having been saved by Christ alone. As you said, what else is there to do? What else is there for a true follower of Christ to do? It's laid out for us. And that correlates with Matthew 25 and all the other scriptures that exhort us to do justice and mercy.
That's right.
And that brings me to a question I hadn't thought of, but our conversation has now prompted it. I've had conversations with Christians, and the point has come up that, well, mercy is the primary thing. We show our mercy by going into a context of either supplying what an orphanage needs in the middle of Africa, or all of which are necessary and good things. But the justice side of it is something that we leave to other groups. I have never felt right about that in my own personal self, and it took me actually hearing someone publicly say at a Micah conference many years ago that justice and mercy work together. Mercy is seeing the pain and the hardship and the agonies of whoever it is in that context, and doing all we can as Christians to alleviate that. And justice addresses the issue of why that situation is the way it is. And justice will speak out and do what is necessary to actually bring about some sort of change to that situation. Does that make sense to you?
That does, and I agree with you. And let's connect that back with our thinking and our subject, which is about the persecuted church and believers. And we need to try and think through how it is that we may be able to address the core issues, the fundamental issues, as well as dealing with those acts of mercy. So one of our arms might be baking the cake, the other arm might be dealing with why the person is hungry and needs the cake, if you understand.
Yeah.
So I think that is correct. And that call from God to become people of justice and righteousness and mercy, the call of the 8th century prophets, Amos, Micah, Hosea, Isaiah, that call has not left us.
No.
That call remains.
God of justice, Savior to all, came to rescue the weak and the poor, chose to serve and not be served. Jesus, you have called us. Freely we've received, now freely we will give. We must go, live to feed the hungry, stand beside the broken. We must go, stepping forward, keep us from just singing, move us into action. We must go to act justly every day, loving mercy in every way, walking humbly before you, God. You have shown us what you require. Freely we've received, now freely we will give. We must go, live to feed the hungry, stand beside the broken. We must go, stepping forward, keep us from just singing, move us into action. We must go. Fill us up and send us out. Fill us up and send us out. Fill us up, send us out, Lord. Fill us up and send us out. Fill us up and send us out. Fill us up and send us out, Lord. Fill us up and send us out. Fill us up and send us out. Fill us up, send us out, Lord. Fill us up, send us out. You fill us up and you send us out. Fill us up, send us out, Lord. Yeah. stepping forward. Keep us from just singing, move us into action. We must go, we must go. Fill us up and you send us out.
Why do we not hear more about our brothers and sisters in these difficult circumstances and regions of the world? Why don't we generally hear more about them in our typical church meeting, in our youth groups, in our conferences? Why is this a subject that doesn't seem to be a very popular one if it's going to be talked about at all?
Isn't that a good question? And obviously, neither you nor I can frame a response based on what we think might be the motive or lack of motive in somebody else. So those who are listening would be aware that we can't comment on that. But we can probably look at some things that may help us think through that issue. It might be easy to say that our culture of self-absorption, self-gratification, it might be easy to say that, and that's definitely going to be part of it. And there is little doubt in my mind, and this is something for debate, people might disagree with this, but in my mind there's little doubt that that culture of self-absorption and self-gratification has been aided and abetted by the structured Western church life, which sees most of its resources and time and energy going into meetings that will make us learn, us sing well, us enjoy the time, us feel pumped up. And even our winning of people to Christ is channeled down that direction. We rarely invite people to Jesus, we invite people to church. Come to our meeting. We even put up signs inviting them, as it were, come and hear us sing, come and watch us meet, and this will be good for you, and maybe you'll find Christ. And they may too, and some do, through the preaching, of course. But so much of that is focused on us and what we are doing. And that's where our resources go. Try raising money for, you think of the time and money and energy that would go into raising money for a $1, $2, $3, $5 million church complex. And usually it will succeed. The church will split, but usually it will succeed. But think of the time, energy and money that's put into raising money to try and feed believers in a persecuted nation. Very little. So that imbalance, which is the imbalance of our culture, that imbalance has probably been brought into our church life, and we need to recognize it and deal with it. And I'm not criticizing everything. I'm not saying all churches are wrong or anything. I'm saying that me, Ray Barnett, I have that same imbalance. I know that my emotions go up and down depending on my own well-being, financially, economically, all of those things. I am part of it. But we need to recognize it and have that conversation. But I wonder whether, and you can either nod or shake your head on this, I wonder whether the persecuted church is a challenge to our rather fragile grip on the gospel and its impact in a fallen world. In our meetings today, let me explain what I mean. In our meetings today, many of our songs are, to my mind, a rather random collection of praise phrases, and they're expressions of love. There is that element of musical enjoyment and all of those things. And those things have a place. I acknowledge that. That's fine. That's not an issue for me. But you see, that alone, if that alone is where we are, that leaves us with nothing to say to people whose lives are not exuberant, who are not experiencing the happiness.
Can you see me nodding?
I see you nodding, whose lives seem to be falling apart. We have nothing to say. And for example, if you were to take the breadth of the words in many of our meetings, some are better than others, of course. But if you take the breadth of the words we sing or say in many of our meetings, and the emotions that are usually part of our songs, many of our songs, and if you were to compare them with the breadth of emotions in the Psalms, the pain, the heartache, the questions, God, why have you forsaken me? God, where are you? Father, why won't you wake up? Why won't you answer me? The perplexity, the anger at the silence of God, the deep anguish over being forsaken by friends and loved ones, the emotional bruising that we read of in the Psalms, as well as the praise and joy and dancing and cymbals. We would see, I think, that what we are perpetuating or engendering in people's minds is very thin. It's as thin as the wrapping paper in which the gift is wrapped. We're not giving ourselves a depth of understanding of the way God can meet the deepest human needs and of God's heart for a broken world. I recall the book The Godly Man. Is that what it was called? The Godly Man, about a Chinese pastor or something? I'm not sure whether that was it or not. And I have a few,
The Heavenly Man?
The Heavenly Man, that's the one.
Brother Yun.
Yeah, Brother Yun. I have no specific opinion on the book, but it did the rounds, and it was just, everybody was reading it. Oh, you must read this, you must read this. And it was, talked about in groups and churches, and Bible study was on church book stands and all that sort of stuff. It was really terrific, as a thing that people were pressing. But I wonder how many rose to the occasion. How many read that book? And instead of saying, wow, that's what God did, past tense, I wonder how many rose to the occasion and said, if that's what God can do in that situation, then we as a church are going to set aside 10% of our people. We are going to train them and send them out to minister to those broken people. We're going to send them to where their lives may even be in danger. In other words, we will rise to his occasion. What we did, we're like, commentators on the telly, a football match. We've got all these heroes, and we like the heroes, we like what they did, but none of us will play the game. And, that, does it come back then to that one dimension, that rather thin layer of Christian experience that we tend to foster? And even in our own society, there are many whose Christian lives don't measure up. They live with heartache. They live with the heartache of loss and brokenness, of disability emotionally, mentally, physically, relationally. And what do we have to say to them? It's difficult for us if all of our thinking is at that level of praise and joy. So come on back. How did I get into that? I got into that by saying that I wonder whether there's something about the fact that the persecuted believers are a challenge to our perhaps narrowed perception of the gospel and of God and his ways and work in the world. Was that a long answer to a question? It probably was.
No, but it was an excellent answer, and we needed to hear that, and you've summed it up. If I could think of a bigger word than challenge, I would use that. Our brothers and sisters are more than challenging me, and that is one of the primary aims of this program, is that what we are hearing, in whatever way, it's not just going to be information. I would consider this program a complete failure if listeners sat there afterwards and basically said, oh dear, that is just so sad, like we do when we hear the news. And then it gets slotted away in some filing cabinet in our head, and that's it. We need to be provoked to the point where, if our perspective doesn't change, we're just going to stay in this narrow, thin, shallow layer of Christianity, because that's what we're used to and that's what we're happy with. And again, quoting C.S. Lewis again, I think, wasn't it he that said, it's not that we as people, and I'm paraphrasing, it's not that we as people expect or want too much. It's that our expectations are so low. I don't know if that relates to what, but we've become, I think, so used to that level of living out our Christianity that we can't seem to actually, anything like this is so foreign that we want to just put it away and not want to deal with it, because if we actually did, it would behoove us to change.
Yes, that's probably right. And when we talk of the challenge and we talk about change, we don't have to immediately think that we're going to have to stop going out for coffee or stop watching a movie or stop doing this. That's not the issue. No. It's not what we stop. It's what we start. And it may mean us starting to say, well, what could I do? Is there somebody I could help? Is there some brother or sister? Is there some need overseas that I could help? And because this program is about those overseas, but the same is here for Australia. Right. If we have compassion here, we will probably also have compassion overseas. So is there some way we could help? And there are wonderful groups and organisations, people like Tear Fund, different ones like that. There would be others. I shouldn't mention one and not the others, but you know what I mean. Right. Who give us an avenue for saying, well, I'm not sure that I can do much, but I can do this. And you may find that this becomes a this and a this, and a this and a this and a this. So it's not what we stop doing, it's what we start doing. And if we start on that pathway, we may find that change begins to take place.
It's not what we stop doing, it's what we start doing. Convicting words, aren't they? I'm sure Ray has left us all with much to ponder and wrestle with.
Tears are falling, hearts are breaking. How we need to hear from God. You've been promised, we've been waiting. Welcome, Holy Child. Welcome, Holy Child. Hope that you don't mind our manger. How I wish we would have known, but long awaited, holy stranger, make yourself at home. Please make yourself at home. Bring your peace into our violence. Bid our hungry souls be filled. Word now breaking heaven's silence. Welcome to our world. Welcome to our world. Fragile fingers sent to heal us. Tender brow prepared for thorn. Tiny heart whose blood will save us. Unto us is born. Unto us is born. So wrap our injured flesh around you. Breathe our air and walk our side. Rob our sin and make us holy. Perfect Son of God. Perfect Son of God. Welcome to our world.
Please join me next week. This is Helen Motti for Eternity.
For eternity. For eternity. For eternity. For eternity.
For Eternity is produced in the studios of Rima FM, Port Macquarie.